Good afternoon. I want to thank everybody who joins us. Ukraine Media Center Ukraine Inform continues its operation. My name is Olga Atamanova. It's year 9 of the war, and it's day 342 of the full-scale invasion of the Russian aggressor. And now we will be talking about the situation in our borders. Joining us in this studio is Andriy Demchenko, the spokesperson of the State Bodyguard Service of Ukraine. Good afternoon, Mr. Andriy. Good afternoon, Mr. Andriy. Let's start with the hottest spots on our map. I mean, the borders with Belarus and Russia. What's the situation over there? Good afternoon, everybody. Well, I will touch the topic of the active warfare. I want to mention that the units of the State Bodyguard Service of Ukraine, in close cooperation with other defense forces, actively defend our land. Unfortunately, the enemy continues offensive actions in Bakhmut direction, and in fulfilling the duties in the front lines, the State Bodyguard Service acts in compliance with the general concept of the General Staff of Ukraine, strongly holding their positions. Yesterday, the units of the State Bodyguard Service were suffering more than 50 shellings. On the daily basis, the State Bodyguard Service servicemen repel the enemy attacks in the Bakhmut area. The offensive operations by the enemy did not cease, even regardless very substantial losses of the enemy. Yesterday, one UAV, which was conducting reconnaissance of our positions, was destroyed by State Bodyguard Service. Also, the mortar teams of the State Bodyguard Service inflict substantial losses on the enemy, who precisely strike the enemy positions, destroying reinforcements and enemy infantry, performing offensive actions on the positions of the State Bodyguard Service units. In close cooperation with other defense forces, together with repelling the enemy offensive, the air reconnaissance of the State Bodyguard Service of Ukraine is calling artillery fire on enemy positions. The head of the State Bodyguard Service of Ukraine visited the position of the servicemen in Bakhmut area recently. Mr. Serhiy Deineko paid special attention to the issue of provision of the covering of the basic needs of the units of the State Bodyguard Service of Ukraine, and also to their teamwork and coordination with units of other defense forces. The head of State Bodyguard Service visited the positions of State Bodyguard Service units in the border with Russia in Kharkiv region. The heads of units, the unit commanders, mentioned that the enemy keeps shelling the territory of Ukraine from the territory of Russian Federation, launching UAVs for inflicting strikes on the positions of our servicemen, and also conducts reconnaissance and electronic warfare measures. Our servicemen, in close cooperations with the units of the armed forces of Ukraine, managed to track the enemy UAVs and destroy them to obstacle their reconnaissance in the areas close to the border with Russia. The terrorist country does not cease their terroristic actions, and on the daily basis the areas along the border suffer shellings, mostly in Sumy region, but as well Chernigiv and Kharkiv regions are being affected by enemy fire. From the beginning of this week, the enemy terrorized those areas more than 250 times as of today. In the border with Belarus, the situation is under control. however, is still tense. Belarus continues to support Russia in their terroristic actions. On the 16th of January, the training of aviation component started, which is announced to end on the 1st of February, I mean tomorrow. However, we did not document or spot any training actions right near the border of Ukraine. Also, we do not observe the concentration of forces which would have been capable of initiating offensive operation from the north to the territory of Ukraine. The units of the Russian Federation Armed Forces are deployed in the training fields in Belarus. However, since the beginning of January, more units of the Russian Federation Armed Forces started entering the territory of Belarus for battle coordination. The units of the Ukrainian reconnaissance forces track the situation in the depth of Belarus to understand how threatening is the situation for the time being. However, regardless of anything happening in that direction, our task is to maintain strong defense. We cannot underestimate the enemy, and we have to be ready for any development of the situation. I want to also mention that in the border with Belarus and the areas close to the border, our defense forces built the engineer reinforcement facilities, and all the defense forces continued training the teamwork and coordination actions to be able to repel the enemy attack. As to the borders with Moldova and EU, the dynamic intensifies. The daily passenger flow to both sides is 75-80,000 persons. Last week, or yesterday, for example, 35,000 people entered and 37,000 people left Ukraine. There is no prevalence during these days in terms of numbers of people either entering or leaving Ukraine. For the time being, the passenger flow usually falls after the New Year and Christmas holidays, and the most intense passenger flow is in the borders with Poland. Starting from 24th of February, 31 million persons crossed the Ukrainian border, including 27.7 million citizens of Ukraine. Comparing to year 2022, the overall comparing to 2021, the passenger flow fell 27% in 2022. First of all, due to the closure of all the checkposts in Belarus, Russia, and Transnistria's sector of Moldovan border. However, the movement intensified in the borders with countries of EU and Moldova. Unfortunately, we still document the attempts of illegal crossing of borders by the citizens of Ukraine. More than 9,100 such persons were detained in the specifically in the border with Romania and Moldova. More than 3,500 people were detained attempting to cross the border with counterfeit documents, and the large part of them accounts for border with Hungary and Poland. The government implemented new rules for crossing the border by the citizens of Ukraine. They came into effect recently, the resolution was initialized by the National Security and Defense Council, and those amendments contemplate that people's deputies, judges, prosecutors, and state employees who are also on the list of amendments only can leave the territory of Ukraine for service trips, for business trips. Also, there are certain exemptions envisaged for certain categories of people where such persons may leave Ukraine not only within the frame of business trip. So the governments of the local communities, the heads of businesses, for example, have to submit the application to the State Bodyguard Service of Ukraine within 3 days period. Should submit an application, and the list of the people who are about to leave Ukraine on a business trip, and they such representatives should inform the State Bodyguard Service about the changes in positions of such persons or employees. Mr. Andriy, do we understand it correct that the State Bodyguard Service will be the controlling agency who will check whether any person belongs to any list as that you mentioned recently, and then to prohibit, to restrict such person from crossing the border? Well, we will continue complying with our duties, including the control in the state border as to the, for example, those lists. But let's talk about not only control, but also about the agencies which were defined by the government that I mentioned about those lists that have to be submitted within 3 days period. They started coming, but it was not everybody who submitted the necessary list. So the actions of the servicemen of the State Bodyguard Service will be governed by such lists. So and then based on them, they will either restrict or let the person cross the border. So the 3 days period expires today, actually. So tomorrow, all those lists should be submitted to the State Bodyguard Service of Ukraine. Well, yes, and we will deliver the information to the inspectors in our check posts, so they check people crossing the border with the list. Olena Shepko, Ukrinform, I also have a question about the amendments to the procedures for crossing the border. Are there any exemptions for the women who are on state service? Well, let me tell you about all the exemptions. So those who are allowed to cross the border are women and men who are single parents. I mean, for example, if a man is a single parent, if they have a child up to 18 years, they are allowed to cross the border for visiting their child abroad, or if they accompany their child, and they should have relevant documents. Another case is the hospitalization abroad. The government defined that such persons are allowed to cross the border provided they have necessary documents, first of all the passport and a letter from the Ministry of Health that stipulating that a hospital abroad or another medical facility is ready to accept such person. And the third exemption is based on the resolution of a special resolution of the head of the State Bodyguard Service. It's the case when one of such persons listed in 2 previous items dies abroad, the relatives of such person may cross the border to visit them. So the state employees will be able to leave Ukraine based on other procedures. For example, disability or other cases. So in this case, now they're not exempt based on such other procedures. Now they're only allowed to leave for business trips or under those 3 items that I mentioned. But can you give us a little bit more details about the first item on your list? So does it only cover single either father or man? No, single parent. It's only for men because women can live abroad without any restrictions. Dear colleagues, do you have any more questions? Vitaly Zalewski, Channel 5, you mentioned that the state bodyguard service detained people on the border. Were there any cases with the government officials being detained in the border? No, we don't have such information so far. I was talking about the counterfeit documents. Well, they are mostly the persons from 18 to 60 who fall under the restrictions, so they were forging the documents for that they are restricted from military service or exempt from military service, or they were forging the documents about the death of a relative, of a close relative, like a wife who was staying abroad, or that they have more than 1 child, for example, that they have 3 children, and they fall under the category of those allowed to leave. And they just try to cross the border either alone or as a team. So for what I understand, those changes come into effect tomorrow. No, the resolution of the government is in effect starting from Saturday. Dear colleagues, we have any more questions? Ukrainian Center of Dialogue and Communication. The man who left Ukraine in the beginning of the war, after the 24th of February, will there be penalized? Will they be liable in terms of any fines? Well, starting from the implementation of the martial law of Ukraine and restriction for the men in their right to leave Ukraine, there is a strict list of persons who are allowed to cross the border, and while leaving the border and the processing of the Ukrainian citizens in the checkposts is performed in strict compliance with the rules of crossing the border. If somebody leaves illegally, they will be liable as they come back to Ukraine. But the servicemen of the state bodyguard service, they process everybody in strict compliance with the rules implemented before. Mr. Andriy, thank you for this report. Our next briefing is at 16:30. Joining us will be Oleg Senegubov, the military governor of Kharkiv region, so bear with us. Thank our armed forces, and glory to Ukraine, glory to the heroes.